Okay, today's topic is the characteristics of life. And these are going to be, I think, seven. I think there's seven of them. Seven or so characteristics that help define how a living thing is different from a non-living thing. In order to be considered a living thing, uh, you must follow all seven characteristics. Okay, so characteristic number one is organization and cells. Organization is the high degree of order within an organism's internal and external parts. For example, an owl and a rock. A rock has a specific shape, which is usually irregular. So different rocks are going to have different shapes and different sizes. But the owl is highly organized. If I showed you the picture of any owl or any species of owl, you would still be able to tell that it's an owl and not, say, a chicken or a goose, because it has particular body parts that are arranged in almost the same way. For example, they have two forward-facing eyes. What forward-facing eyes tell you in the animal kingdom is that they are predators, because having forward-facing eyes gives you depth perception, so you can tell how far away something is. This is good if you're a hunter. And if you think about a chicken or a sparrow or a duck, they have eyes on the sides of their head because they are prey. They're not predators. Having eyes on each of the side of your head gives you a wider, almost 360 view, so you can watch out for any predators that might be chasing you. So that's the difference between forward-facing eyes and eyes on the sides of your head. Owls also interact with the environment in the same way. For example, one, they're predators, so they hunt, and two, they are nocturnal, which means they are only active at night. The other part of that are cells. All living things are made of cells. So if, say, like a ceramic mug, there's no cells in here, not living. Cells are the basic unit of life, and the most basic organism is unicellular. And in biology, you didn't see it so much with chemistry, but you will see it a lot with biology, that the vocab can be broken down if you understand parts of words. So you've got cell R, which makes it an adjective. This obviously means cells, and uni means one. So it's an adjective describing the word organism being made of only one cell. An example of a unicellular organism is bacteria. Now, if you are not unicellular, you are multicellular, then this is being made of more than one cell. And normally multicellular organisms are made of many, like tens of thousands or millions of cells. I think the human body has about 30 trillion cells. So plant, animal, human, etc. would fall under this category. All living things have complex organization. So even at the cellular level, if you look at one cell, even a cell is highly organized. It has small structures called organelles that are responsible for different functions. Very similar in the way to, if you look at a human body has many different organs, like your heart, your liver, your stomach, your brain, and each of those organs has a specific function. None of your organs work independently of each other. They all work together so that you are able to survive as a living being. A cell organelles do the same thing, and you'll learn about that in a later chapter, but the cell has many small little parts called organelles that each have their own function that all work together. Now, part of the organization for a multicellular organism is that cells, which are the basic unit, they come together to form tissues, and those tissues perform specific functions. For example, muscle tissue. The tissues come together to form organs, and organs come together to form organ systems, and then that forms the organism. So tying in this with the chemistry that you learned last year, all matter is made of atoms. Atoms come together to form molecules. Molecules form what are called macromolecules. Again, with the vocab, macro means large, very large. So like to if you go to the macro store, which they spell differently with a K, um, I'm sure you've been there before, you can only buy things in bulk. You have to buy things in large quantities. Anyway, so macromolecules, that's going to be your protein, your fat. This is a nucleic acid, that's DNA, and carbohydrates. Those are all macromolecules. The macromolecules are going to help form organelles. This is what's called a mitochondria. This is what provides the energy to the cell. Organelles form cells, then tissues and organs, organ systems, and blah, whole organism. This is organization. You don't find this in a rock. Okay, next characteristic, living things respond to their environment. When you go outside in the sun, the first thing that happens is that you might notice that your skin starts to feel warmer. That's not just from the heat from the sun, but because the heat from the sun is warming up your overall body temperature. And so the first thing that your body does, the first thing that your body does before it sweats is that your skin will become warmer, and it will become more pink or red color, because the first thing your body's going to do is going to dilate or to expand the blood vessels near your skin. And that's what makes the skin appear a bit more like when you blush, because having the blood nearer to the skin means it's closer to the outside, which means the heat can try to radiate away from that. If that is not enough to bring the body temperature down, then we start to sweat. So the question is, why do we sweat? If you have ever gotten out of the shower and stood directly in front of a fan or an air conditioner and you feel like ultra cold, that is because the air that's blowing on you evaporates the water on your skin. And as the water evaporates, it takes heat with it. So that's why we sweat. It's 99% water and 1% salt and a little bit of enzyme, but 99% of sweat is water, so that when the wind blows or just from the act of the water evaporating from the sweat, it will take heat with it. So that's an example of how we respond to our environment. In order to respond, when your body responds, it's responding to what's called a stimulus. Stimulus is a physical or chemical change, either in the internal or the external environment. So another example of a response is when your eyes dilate in response to lower levels of light. Again, dilate meaning to get larger. So here we have a picture on the left, which is in a brighter light when the pupil is going to constrict, it's going to get smaller. And then in the dark, the pupil dilates, it gets bigger, because the pupil is the part of the eye which is what allows the light to go in. It's kind of like the shutter of a camera. So we just have a clip here where you can see the pupil constricting. Now you might notice the iris, which is, oops, okay, that doesn't quite match up. The brown part of her eye, is called the iris, and that is a muscle that's actually controlling the opening to the iris. Okay, next characteristic is homeostasis. Again, with vocab, always breaking down vocab. Homeo means stable, and stasis is environment. This is huge. Now, going back to the sweat example, the reason why we sweat is because we have to maintain homeostasis when it comes to body temperature. It has to be at or around between 36 and 37. So all organisms are going to have many different mechanisms that allow them to maintain a stable internal environment. Without these mechanisms, we will die. And another example besides the body temperature is a cell's water content, which is controlled by taking in and releasing water. If a cell has too much water, it ruptures or it breaks open and it dies. If a cell has too little amount of water, then it will shrivel or shrink and die. So it's a very delicate balance there. So here we're going to see a plant cell shrinking. You see it going? So plant cells have a cell wall, which is why you only see the pink part shrinking. That's the cell membrane shrinking away. And here we have red and white blood cells that are going to burst. So how do you know that they burst is they'll basically just disappear. See? Disappeared, which means that they broke open and their contents were released. There we go. It's easier to see with the white blood cells. Boom. So that's what happens when you put cells in 100% pure water, because cells aren't 100% pure water and water ends up rushing into the cell and they pop. So homeostasis is the maintenance of a stable level of internal conditions, even though the environment is constantly changing. This is why, as mammals, we are able to live in a lot more diverse environments than, say, fish and reptiles and amphibians, because we expend a lot of energy to be able to control our internal environment. So we have, like I said before, there's many, many mechanisms that are used to maintain this stable environment. Talked about temperature already. Okay, so let's go the opposite side. If it's too cold, what happens? Your cells are going to burn fuel to produce body heat. For birds and mammals, which are warm-blooded animals, they have hair and or, not and or, hair or feathers to fluff up. So you might notice when you get cold, the hair on your arms stands up, and that is to trap air next to the skin, so that air will be heated by your body heat, and so you have kind of an invisible little layer of warmth around you. And again, if you get too hot, the blood vessels dilate to bring blood closer to the skin to release heat, and you start to sweat. Next characteristic is metabolism. This is basically how organisms use their energy. So metabolism is the sum of all of the chemical reactions that take place that take in and transport energy and materials from the environment. Some organisms can make their own food by using energy from the sun during photosynthesis. Other organisms need to eat food to get energy. Next characteristic is growth and development. Living things grow and increase in size. But you might say, well, some non-living things can also grow by accumulating or building up more of the same material. For example, crystals, or even fire. So here's a video where you'll see crystals growing, which is why in this example, or in this characteristic, it's not just growth, but it's growth and development. You have to have the development part, because this is a non-living thing, but it's growing, but it doesn't develop. Living things grow through cell division, which you see happening in the video here in bacteria. Cell division and enlargement of cells. Cell division is the formation of two new cells from an existing cell. So there's a joke that's shared by biologists everywhere that says biology is the only field where both multiplication and division mean the same thing, because cells multiply by dividing. For unicellular organisms, after cell division is cell enlargement. And in multicellular life, organisms are going to mature through cell division, cell enlargement, and development. So let's go through what development is. This is a process by which an organism becomes a mature adult. It involves cell division and cell differentiation, where cells become specialized. As a result, an adult organism is composed of many different types of cells specialized for different functions. And again, going back to, or I haven't showed you this yet, but this is a diagram of how different species undergo development. This is what we mean by development. So these are embryos. We have a fish, a salamander, tortoise, chicken, pig, cow, rabbit, and then this category is human at the end. So I want you to look, because this also tells us about evolution as well, which is one of the characteristics I'll talk about in a minute. But you see how fish and salamander are very similar, even at a later stage in their development, because this tells you that they share a recent common ancestor. They're closely related. Same thing with the tortoise and chicken. You see how these two are kind of similar? I mean, the chicken almost looks just like the tortoise, except you can see the shell development here and then the tail, where chickens don't really have that long of a tail, because birds actually evolved from reptiles. And then the last four here, these are the mammals. You can see how similar they are through their development. So you get an idea of how life evolved on this planet and how related we are to other things. Next characteristic is reproduction. All organisms produce new organisms like themselves through reproduction. Unlike the other characteristics, this is the only one that is not essential for the survival of the organism, but it is essential for the survival of the species. During reproduction, organisms are going to transmit hereditary information to their offspring. Offspring are the babies. Now, that hereditary information that's passed down through the generations is encoded in a molecule of DNA. DNA stands for deoxyribonucleic acid. You don't have to remember that if you don't want to, just DNA is fine. And on DNA, you have short segments that code for a single trait, and that is called a gene. Reproduction can happen in two ways. Asexual reproduction is when you have one parent. The offspring are going to be genetically identical or exactly the same to the parent. And you have to understand that when you have asexual reproduction, like bacteria, the parent no longer exists. So basically, imagine if you were able to split yourself in half and grow a new missing half. That's asexual reproduction. It has advantages in that you don't need to have a mate, and which means you can basically reproduce whenever you want, and it's quick. Bacteria reproduce about every 20 minutes. The other way of reproduction is sexual reproduction, and it happens through two parents. And this has an advantage because it's genetically different. The offspring are genetically different. This is a huge, huge advantage. So anytime I ask you, why is sexual reproduction so much more advantageous than asexual reproduction, is because of what's called genetic variation. And you cannot see that more clearly than this time of COVID, where you have some people who don't have any symptoms at all and other people who die a week or even a few days after being diagnosed. That is because of genetic variation. So it's very important, because if you imagine that all, 7.7 billion humans on the planet, if we were all identical and a disease like COVID-19 came out, either we would all survive or we would all die. Like the species would get wiped out from one virus. So that's why sexual reproduction is so much more advantageous. Okay, the next characteristic is adaptation through evolution. And this is basically just changing over time. It does not occur on an individual level. Individuals don't evolve over their life, not biologically, maybe like culturally or psychologically, but biologically, individuals don't evolve. It's as a species, and you're talking about tens of thousands or millions of years. An example is a polar bear. How a polar bear is adapted to survive in super cold temperatures. First thing is that you see in the bottom right hand corner, that is the hair shaft of the fur on a polar bear. It's hollow. How does having a hollow hair shaft help? That's a lot of alliteration. how does having a hollow hair shaft help in surviving a cold temperature? Well, what it does is it directs the heat and the light from the sun straight down to the skin, which is black. That's right. If you shave a polar bear, the skin is actually black. And they eat fatty animals to gain weight to insulate them during the winter. So here you can see down to the skin. Also, you might think that a polar bear's hair is white, but it's not. It's actually clear. So those are the characteristics which are required to be classified as a living organism.